All right, so let's talk about this Bundesliga match day. Um, it starts off with a banger on Friday. I looked at this match day and I thought, wow, this is actually a really great match day to take us back out of the international break because here's what we're going to chat about. This preview show has increasingly become one where we look at major themes rather than in particular matches, but the matches this week, the three matches that we are going to focus on primarily really write their own storylines in very different ways. And taking us straight out of the international break is Dortmund against St Pauli. Stefan, Nuri Sahin he was probably the happiest man alive that there was an international break, considering the way things had been going for Borussia Dortmund. This is such an incredibly massive game for him and Dortmund, considering everything that's going on there. But it's also a really incredibly important game for St. Pauli, considering where they are and they have started the Bundesliga campaign. And for them, of course, it isn't. I don't think anyone would say, okay, well, St. Pauli need to win this match. But it is also something, it's also come to a point now where they need to put points on the board. So this is just an incredibly important match for both teams at the different ends of the table, and I think can really nicely set up this weekend.
Yeah, it does. I think it's going to be a really interesting game. I think the Friday night games tend to be that. They tend to be, it's almost like form or expectation just go flying out the window in these matches. And I think this one has the possibility of being quite an entertaining kind of box-to-box match for two reasons, really, in my opinion. The most obvious one to me is that Dortmund, although are still relatively consistent at home, they've got the best home record in the league right now. They've got the most goals scored, but they've still conceded 4 goals in 3 games in their home game. Sorry. And, the performances haven't exactly been outstanding. Yes, it's 3 wins on the trot, but, a 4-2 win over Heidenheim and a 4-2 win over Bochum, or anything but comfortable. And Nuri Sahin goes into this game, I think maybe a little nervous. Obviously, the jury's still very much out on him. And his press conference this week was him basically talking about how much he was sweating over players returning from international duty. He was talking about how he has this group chat with the players, and they all basically check in after their games, more or less immediately after the game, to say, I played in this position and I'm either injured or I feel fine, I'm healthy. And every single one of the players on international duty have to check in one by one. And he said they only found out on Tuesday night, the last person to check in. And he's like, we've got a clean bill of health, everyone's fine. But they're actually still missing quite a lot of players. Karim Adeyemi's still injured, Gio Reyna's still injured, Julian Duranville is injured. Jan Kutu, the right back, might be out. Maximilian Bayer had to pull out the under-21s because he was ill. And there's also concerns about Julian Ryerson, and I think Nicholas Sula's out as well. So some of the predicted lineups I've seen for this game have, Emre Can at right back, Benza Bayiri back in at left back, Schlotterbeck and Valdemar Anton in central defence because there's no other central defenders left. And, a midfield of Sabitzer and Nemcha with, I think, more or less the only wingers that actually Sahin has to hand are Donio Malin and Jamie Gittins, which are obviously by no means bad players, but it's a bit of a, this Dortmund team's beginning to kind of creak the edges due to these injuries, so they're by no means at full strength. And so I think, that obviously means that St. Pauli can maybe take some confidence from that. And I think there's also the case that I'm not quite sure why, but St. Pauli do seem to have more fun playing away from home so far this season. All the goals they've scored this season have actually come away from home. And they've picked up some decent performances. They obviously had that win over Freiburg. And I think they only have to look at those games against Bochum and Heidenheim to think, they've got an opportunity here to kind of join those two clubs. And I know those two clubs walked away with no points, but they definitely caused a bit of a stir. And I guess the only other thing I'd also add is that while I thought they were quite poor against Augsburg and Union Berlin, they then obviously turned things around and got a point against Leipzig, and then went on to beat Freiburg before losing to Mainz. So they're almost like this team who actually performed better against the better teams in the league so far. So I don't know. There's a lot to this game that makes me think it might not be a straightforward win for Dortmund.
Yeah, I mean, it is. They have never lost to St Pauli at home in 8 Bundesliga games. But the last time the two met was in 2021-22 in the round of 16 of the German Cup, and St Pauli won that game 2-1. That's only 2 years ago. So, it's interesting too, listening to you here about the players that are going to be available and not available. And I think Dortmund, it's very evident that they have struggled without Adeyemi in particular, right? And it is so unfortunate that the moment he seems to finally find his form, he suffers an injury. It's very much the story of his recent career. And then, another aspect, and I'm going to kicker here, and the print issue that comes out usually on Thursday morning German time, right? And the big story there was Waldemar Anton, Nico Schlotterbeck gone for the German national team. Nico Schlotterbeck, in particular, I thought had a very good international break for Germany in both those, in particular the game against the Netherlands, where the German defense looked very solid, right? But in Niklas Süle suffering from in fact he was sick, so he couldn't really make a name for himself during that period, and so. It's not like I think that one of the big issues that you really see with Borussia Dortmund at the moment is that they have, it feels like they have a lot of depth, but sometimes the injuries to certain key players really seem to derail them. And then because of that, there isn't enough push for those spaces in the starting 11, right? Like, because you would expect like Duranville, Adeyemi, Niklas Süle, all these guys pushing for starting 11 positions and really pushing those players that are ahead of them in the ranking to play better, and it almost feels like the team selects itself at the moment. And then you have certain guys like Julian Brandt is a great example for me. I mentioned it in the bonus show already earlier this week, but there's a reason why he's no longer with the national team, but yet he still plays for Dortmund on a regular basis. And I'm not saying he's not an important player, but he can be so hit and miss at times, right? So it's like, I just feel one of the reasons why Dortmund are struggling is because Nuri Sahin hasn't really found his way. But sometimes I also sense that there isn't quite the same competitiveness within the squad to create a starting 11. And maybe that is a big issue that this team has at the moment, right? And another thing, as I'm listening to you, is like, yeah, like the likes of Heidenheim going to the Signal Iduna Park and taking points there. I think Dortmund be very well advised to take the St. Pauli team serious, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wrote about Dortmund just after they broke for the international break. I talked about Nuri Sahin, and it was more a piece on Dortmund as a whole and Vatska in particular, but I was kind of aiming at Vatska, and I guess Nuri Sahin kind of got caught in the crossfire. And I talked about how I think it's the poorest start to a Bundesliga career, a Bundesliga season in 6 or 7 years, I think. In fact, it might be the worst start. This might be the worst start since Klopp's last season. I'm sure double check the article.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah. So I mean, there's absolutely no room for anything but all 3 points in this game for Nuri Sahin. And I'm really intrigued to see how they do, because so much of Dortmund's success in attack this season has been when they rely on kind of individuals to kind of get the job done for them in attack. You can chalk up just about every win so far this season to Karim Adeyemi, incredible run, incredible shot, Cyril Guirassy kind of pulling a goal out of thin air. As you said, Julian Brandt's had moments. And it's all kind of individual attacking players doing things off the back of their own initiative, off the back of their own kind of impulse, which is fine, but there's just not really been a huge amount of evidence to suggest that the system is working for everyone. It's not really. It's not the same way that you watch, for example, like Bayern or Leverkusen or Stuttgart, where if one player drops out, another player can slip right in, and they've been given the notes, they've been taught to study the role, they know exactly what they're supposed to do because they do what the last guy did. Just don't get that impression with Dortmund, and I do I'll be watching this game with a lot of intrigue to see how both Daniel Malin and Bittens do, or Gittins, right, not Bittens, because I found Gittins to be a little underwhelming when he started games this season, because I think he's better suited at this moment in time as an impact sub. So I think there'll be a lot of pressure on both of them, not really fairly. This team and this coach should be capable of saying, right, well, we're missing a lot of big kind of wide players who tend to win these games this season first, so let's try and rejig the tactics, let's play through the middle, etc., etc. But I'm just intrigued to see how this team work without those key individuals who've been kind of winning games for them so far. And as you said, St Pauli won't make it easy for them.
The projected lineup via kicker is Kobel, of course, in goal, Ryerson, Anton Schlotterbeck, Benzebaini, your friend Benzebaini, Can, Groß, Sabitzer, Brandt, Gittens, Guirassy up front. Sabitzer as an inland attacking midfield. This is not my projection, but I also look at who's missing. Bayer is missing, Süle is missing, Reina is missing, as you mentioned, Adimi Duranville. On the bench right now, Jan Kuto is also missing. He has an injury, a muscle injury. His transfer was made permanent, by the way. I think this week or last week, he hit some sort of clause, and it was made permanent, right? So when you then look at who's available on the bench, Lotka, Meyer, Ostrinsky, those are all goalkeepers. Kaba, Mane, Süle, if he is fit enough, Campbell, Nemcha, Vetjen, and Marlin. That's it. There isn't. It's interesting how this side that had so much depth all of a sudden got dwindled down to so little. Is I think what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would even say that I think Kicker suggesting that Rierson's actually also injured for this game, so he might not even be there, and that's why I was saying earlier on that we might have someone like Emre Can playing right back. So,
dear Lord,
it's kind of going to be which might do less damage than it usually does the central midfield, to be honest. So it might not be the worst idea. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But it's a really big test for Dortmund. I think there's a lot on the line for them if there is for Nuri Sahin. Even though the club itself don't seem too worried about it, I think it's only a matter of time where you eventually have to kind of deal with the elephant in the room, and that elephant's only going to get bigger if they don't pick up all 3 points in this game.
Yeah, I talked to someone from Dortmund during the international break about Nuri Sahin, and I asked whether they think that Sahin is in trouble, and the answer I got, as long as Dortmund are within the reach of the top 4, he is essentially safe. Watzke is not going to fire one of his own as long as Dortmund are in the reach of a Champions League spot. That is the bare minimum. It's the Arsenal approach that we've known for so many decades under Arsene Wenger, right, Stefan? And that's just how things are at Borussia Dortmund. It's being just good enough is good enough. Is where we're at, I guess, at the moment. And I don't know if that's going to change as long as the people are in charge, who are in charge at the moment. So, yeah, interesting. I think this is going to be an incredibly fascinating game. I'm really interested to see, too, how Alexander Blazin will perform with St Pauli at the Signal Iduna Park. They lost their last game against Mainz 3-0. And there's some question marks on whether Irvine is going to be fit for this match. If he isn't, then I think St Pauli are going to be in a bunch of problems. But yeah, it's going to be an absolutely fascinating match, and a really good one to tune in on the Friday night. So yeah, check that one out.